What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. Like a lot of people out there, I've been thoroughly enjoying the new show, The Last of Us on HBO, which I think is a strong contender for the best adaptation of a video game into film or television that I've ever seen. And I think it's going to be a real game changer because for decades, we've seen so many horrendous examples in film and in television where great games have been turned into awful shows and movies. I mean, truly unwatchable piles of crap. And I think part of that stems from the fact that people in film and television, a lot of them fundamentally don't understand video games. They don't play video games because video games are very active, engaged experience. And film and television, they're a very passive experience. One, you're completely dialed in, and the other, you're lying back. But I think part of the success for The Last of Us, at least, or the reason why they've been able to crack the code for this story-based game, obviously The Last of Us has tons of action, but it's got a very strong cinematic story running throughout it. But they brought in Neil Druckmann, the creator of the game, to help write and direct the show. And so he obviously understands what makes that story tick. But the success of the show has gotten me thinking to what are all the great games that I've played going back to the early 80s that might have similar potential to be a great show or movie, provided that you could find creators who understood it and would, basically apply the same love and attention to detail. So today I'm going to be counting down my top 10 games that I'm recommending be adapted into shows or movies. And here's something to keep in mind. In spite of the fact that most video game adaptations in the past have been awful and haven't really worked, that hasn't stopped filmmakers and TV showrunners from trying to do so again and again and again. Now that there's a show that's actually good, that's generating viewers and possibly awards next year, I think the floodgates are going to be open. So we're probably going to see a lot more horrendous examples in the future, but maybe we'll get a few that work out. And one that a lot of people sleep on or forget is the show Castlevania over on Netflix. I thought that show gave us 4 incredible seasons that managed in its own way to take all the best characters, all the best music, all the best story beats from a variety of Castlevania games, stir them all together and give us a kick-ass story with its own unique style. And it helped that writer Warren Ellis just absolutely knocked that show out of the park. But for people who are looking for another example beyond The Last of Us of a great video game making the leap to the small screen, Castlevania gets my highest possible recommendation. Now, of course, with this list, I am limited to the games that I've played. I mean, going back to the days of stand-up arcade games and ColecoVision, I have played a ton of games, but the reality is when you get invested in a game, it might totally occupy all your spare time for weeks, perhaps months, whereas with film and television, I mean, if you watch a lot of movies, you could watch 1 or 2 movies a day your entire life and slowly but surely work your way through thousands of the best movies ever made. And it's just not possible to do the deep dive on as many games as you can with movies. So there are going to be tons of classics and tons of masterpieces that I overlook in this list. A perfect example would be Bloodborne. Bloodborne was a PlayStation exclusive, but I love the games made by From Software. Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3, Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, and now Elden Ring are some of my all-time favorite games. So I'm assuming that Bloodborne, like those games, is an absolute masterpiece and could perhaps be a great flick or show, but I really don't know because I haven't played it. But most of my recommendations are going to come from games that I've played in the 21st century, primarily because the story-driven ingredients, the cinematics, the trailers, etc., oftentimes give us better storytelling and better special effects and better style than a lot of flicks that we throw down $20 to see in the theater. But I'm going to do my best to include some games from the distant past as well. But I'll never forget when I was playing Warcraft 3 back in the early 2000s, as I was going through the game, seeing the different cinematics between the different acts in the game, and just thinking to myself, how come movies and shows aren't as cool as this cinematic? But in terms of the vision and the mood and the atmosphere, I mean, they made movies being made at the time seem totally irrelevant by comparison. So I've always been a little frustrated that all this incredible storytelling is going on in the world of video games, but that people who work in film and television don't seem to realize that. But before I dive into my official list, I thought it'd be useful to go through some of the many video game adaptations that I've already seen where the final product was either mixed and or bad, and I also need to acknowledge which ones I have not seen. But I've seen all the Mia Jovovich Resident Evil movies. They have their moments that are both good and bad. I've seen the 3 Tomb Raider movies. They're all pretty forgettable, but I think a new TV series is about to be made. I've seen a lot of the Mortal Kombat films, and I must admit that the first one absolutely blew my mind when it came out right at the peak of all the Mortal Kombat stand-up arcade craziness, and that opening sequence where the song starts during the New Line logo, I still think is pretty balls to the wall. I thought the TV show The Witcher started out okay, but that's more of an adaptation of the books than of the games, and that whole franchise is rapidly turned into dog shit. Assassin's Creed, I think, is one of the worst examples of a great game franchise being turned into a movie. I think that movie is best left unseen and undiscussed, except for as a cautionary tale. The movie Warcraft, it was pretty terrible. I tried to talk myself into liking it at the time, but when you look at Warcraft 1, 2, and 3, the strategy games, followed by the World of Warcraft, which has been going for almost 20 years now, they've got books, they've got cinematics, they've got so much to draw upon. And it has all the potential in the world to be a giant epic franchise, but they totally shit the bed with that first movie. But another example of an adaptation that didn't quite work out was the movie Silent Hill. Thought that movie had its moments, but it wasn't nearly as terrifying as a single encounter from a game like Silent Hill 2. Now, some of the adaptations that I've not seen include Sonic the Hedgehog, which obviously is doing very well. Never saw the Super Mario Brothers movie. I never saw Double Dragon. Never saw the show Halo, nor did I see Dragon Age, even though I love Dragon Age Origins from back in 2008. I did not see Detective Pikachu. I didn't see Werewolves Within, nor Angry Birds, nor Rampage, nor Monster Hunter. I didn't see Uncharted. I didn't see Prince of Persia. I didn't see Doom. I didn't see Street Fighter, which I probably should because I like the animated movie. And I never saw House of the Dead. But let's start diving into my recommendations, and I'm just going to go through them alphabetically because asking me to rank these into like a top 10 would just break my heart. With some of these adaptations I'm about to recommend, there's a chance there might have been like a web series or a low-budget animated series where basically an attempt at adapting them might have already happened that I somehow failed to take notice of, and if so, I apologize. But let's just dive in, starting with the letter B, with Baldur's Gate 1, 2, and 3. 3 technically hasn't come out yet, but I did the early release version, which allows you to play up through like level 4, but Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 are some of my all-time favorite computer games, and I think it's the best version of Dungeons & Dragons that we've seen in a video game format. And, I mean, I cannot overemphasize what a game changer was, because people had done D&D as computer games in the past with games like Pool of Radiance or Curse of the Azure Bonds, but suddenly it felt like they had really cracked the code, where in terms of the gameplay and the character building and the role-playing, it was as close as you were going to get to actually being at a table, rolling dice with your friends. But I have to say that for Baldur's Gate 3, when they started releasing cinematics for this game a few years back, I was like, whoa, this looks fucking evil and dark and cool. If you're into mind flayers and dragons and all like the Githyanki and all these otherworldly outer planar creatures, suddenly it's like they'd cracked open all this really cool lore and they were just going to the dark side. And as I was playing Baldur's Gate 3, I guess in 2021, some of the cinematics are pretty wild in game. Like you walk into like a house where there's an ogre getting it on with a bugbear, I think, or an owlbear or something like that. It's wild, but I have very low hopes for Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves and March. But if somebody wanted to do an animated series or a live action series based on the Baldur's Gate franchise, sign me up. I think it would fucking rule. But next up, we have what might be my all-time favorite gaming franchise, Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3, which for about 5 years totally, completely took over my life at the expense of pretty much every other video game. There's an entire generation of classics and masterpieces that I overlooked because I just kept playing these games over and over and over again. And I could easily crank those bad boys up right now and just be lost for days, if not weeks. But I started playing them right around the same time that I started a podcast and a YouTube channel. And I feel like I could have created thousands more episodes and videos if I had not been spending so much time playing Dark Souls. Maybe I should have just been making Dark Souls videos. But for people who don't know what this world is, it's kind of hard to put into words because the story, it sometimes can feel a little narratively incoherent. And there are people who have done the deep dive on the lore, but the lore is almost immaterial. What's important about Dark Souls is the mood, the atmosphere, the feeling, the flavor of this world A world that can be incredibly punishing, but also incredibly fair and rewarding. But when it comes to the monster design and the level design, imagine a Japanese sensibility mixed with Western European medieval fantasy. And it's just a perfect hybrid of those worlds. And I'm sure if somebody tried to make a movie out of them, they would try to make them make narrative sense. And I'm like, no. You got to embrace the incoherence. You have to let the audience do the work, trying to piece it all together. Let it be mysterious. Let it be ambiguous. And I feel like, yeah, a really great 3-hour animated movie based on Dark Souls has all the potential in the world to completely blow people's minds wide open. And along those same lines, my third recommendation is for a game that I'm playing right now. It came out a couple years ago, but I'm totally obsessed with Darkest Dungeon. And the sequel's coming out maybe tomorrow, but I'm going to play Darkest Dungeon until I've completely explored every single nook and cranny before I dive into the sequel. But how to make the pitch for Darkest Dungeon, it's even more punishing and even more ruthless than Dark Souls, because when your characters die, they're gone. And along the way, your characters get diseases and they go insane and they have heart attacks from fear and they develop blood cravings. And when you're trying to keep them alive, you basically have this hub where the way they kind of treat their maladies is by going to whorehouses or by being tortured by doctors who apply leeches. It's just the atmosphere. It's just dripping with the most evil kind of Lovecraftian monstrosities imaginable. But when you're finally able to put together a team of adventurers to kill something successfully, it's so rewarding and gives you such a sense of accomplishment. But the look is pretty, I would say, rudimentary, but the art style is so distinctive that I find everything about it to just be chocolate for the eyes. I love the sensibility. And even when I'm screaming with rage at my screen for random RNG, which I feel like the RNG in this game can really help you or it can really kill you. And no matter how good you get, there's always the chance that your party's just going to get completely wiped out at the drop of a hat. But the Darkest Dungeon trailers and the animated sequences, I feel like you can make a brilliant Netflix series from Darkest Dungeon and keep a lot of dark fantasy fans very happy. And next up, we have my favorite game from 2022. It was pretty much the only game I played in 2022 because it was that goddamn good. But we have Elden Ring. From the minds who gave us the Dark Souls franchise, we have one of the greatest RPG experiences that has ever been conceived by human beings. They solicited a little input from George R.R. Martin, which helped quite a bit as well. But it's one of those games where it kind of took everything that worked from their previous games and then just dialed it up to 1,000. It was just epic in scope. It was so grand. And it gave the player so many opportunities for creativity and personal expression through the characters that they would build. And I feel like they are the only studio who really gets how to do this kind of game. But I should acknowledge that there are games out there that have a Dark Souls flavor, like Mortal Shell, which came out, I think, 2 years ago. I absolutely loved Mortal Shell. I played it through twice. But the big riddle with a game like Elden Ring is, how do you take a game where people might invest hundreds, if not thousands of hours, and then distill it down to a 2-hour movie or a season of television? They're very different experiences, and you can't capture that many hours in a standalone story. But I feel like if you found a way to have a movie that is basically in the exact same style as the cinematic trailers, exploring the lore of that world, people would be absolutely riveted. So don't try to recreate the Elden Ring experience, but just give us more of what we already love from the teasers that invited us into that world in the first place. But I feel like Elden Ring, it's a one-of-a-kind masterpiece in gaming, and it has all the potential in the world to be a killer show or movie. But next up, we have yet another one of my all-time favorite franchises, which if you'd asked me back in 2012, I would say is the best gaming franchise ever before the Dark Souls franchise kind of pushed it aside. But who knows? When number 6 comes out in a couple of years, it might regain its number 1 slot. But I'm talking about the Elder Scrolls franchise, and I've played 3, 4, and 5. People just call number 5 Skyrim, but 3 was Morrowind, 4 was Oblivion, 5 was Skyrim. Never played the earlier ones like Daggerfall, but apparently Daggerfall's fucking killer as well. But if you're into role-playing games and medieval fantasy adventure, this is kind of the gold standard for a solo gaming experience. And yeah, I lost years of my life to these games, very happy years to these games. They just nailed it. And I mean, when you watch like the trailer for number 4 and you've got Patrick Stewart providing the narration, or you're watching the trailer for number 5 and you're hearing the voice of Max von Sydow, you can already see how they're going for that epic cinematic experience. But this is yet another one of the situations where when players have invested hundreds of hours, if not thousands of hours, into exploring these worlds and all the different realms and races and subplots, and it's like, how do you try and capture all that into a movie or a show? And it's a totally unenviable task, and so much can go wrong. But I think in the end, what you do is you bring in the people who created those worlds in the first place and ask them, what would you do? Like, don't try and dumb it down. I guess this is my most important takeaway. Don't try and make these games accessible to a larger audience or a fictional audience that's like casual people who don't like video games. The audience for these games is already massive. If you just made shows or movies that appeal to the people who've already bought these games, you're good. So I feel like keep it pure, keep it focused, and the margin for error will be reduced. But Oblivion and Skyrim are totally different in terms of atmosphere. I mean, Oblivion has all these incredible demonic invasions and portals opening up where players have to go inside and close them up. I mean, I thought that was absolutely brilliant. And then Skyrim, you've got, these Dragonborn, these people who can actually like scream in the voice of dragons and bring dragons down from the sky. Anyway, it could be an epic fucking show or flick. But moving on, the next one on my list is most obvious in the world because it was already a movie before it became a gaming franchise, and there's been a little bit of a legal battle between these two, these rival factions. But Grand Theft Auto, there was a movie made in 1977. Roger Corman has the rights to the name Grand Theft Auto as a movie. The movie has nothing to do with the gaming franchise, but the folks who make the game say, well, we have all the rights in the world to make movie and TV adaptations of our games. At some point, somebody's going to have to write somebody a check and keep everybody happy, but these games are wildly popular, and I'm not as well versed in them as I would like to be. I mean, I played number 3, but it was number 5 where I really got sucked in and I started doing the PvP and racing people and battling people. And also because Grand Theft Auto 5 took place in Los Angeles, where I lived for 7 years, I really enjoyed exploring that kind of condensed version of LA and battling cops and battling helicopters, and all the story missions were so elaborate and so complex and so goddamn fun. But when it comes to style, flavor, tone, these games are just a hell of a lot of fun. And anytime a gaming franchise has a lot of people kind of wagging their finger in disapproval, like, oh, that's inappropriate, like you shouldn't be carjacking people, like that's inappropriate. It's like, yeah, no shit. But it's a video game. It's escapist fantasy. So give me all the carjackings and strip clubs and whatnot that you can throw at me. But I feel like this is a movie series that's just dying to happen. When the Fast and Furious movies finally go to their grave, then we can finally have the Grand Theft Auto series, R-rated, that'll be vastly superior in every way. All right, let's get into a little sci-fi. And there's one sci-fi franchise that is just screaming to be made into a movie or a show. And basically, if you just watch all the cinematics from the games, you pretty much already have a kick-ass movie that's already been made. But Amazon's got the rights to this franchise, so a show could be coming our way. But I'm talking about Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3. Fuck Andromeda. I played Andromeda for a few hours. I was like, this game fucking sucks compared to what came before, and I bailed. But 1, 2, and 3, particularly 1 and 2, some of the best games I've ever played. This is back when BioWare was capable of making the best games that we had ever seen. BioWare, I mean, they are really struggling these days to make a game where you're even curious to watch the trailer. But back in the aughts, god damn, they were so fucking good. And I feel like if you could just make an animated series in the style of the first 2 games, it would set the world on fire. Dragon Age Origins would be cool as well. And I know Dragon Age just got an animated series. Otherwise Dragon Age Origins would have made this list. But I feel like they're going in a very different kind of stylistic direction from the early Dragon Age Origins, where if you watch those early trailers, it's heavy metal and guys in armor fighting the, what are they called? Like the Scorned anyway, there's some name for all these demonic creatures, but for whatever reason, they have abandoned everything that made Dragon Age Origins cool. But I'm talking about Mass Effect. Let me try to stay on subject. If you like tactical combat, these games are incredibly satisfying. No matter what kind of character you build and what kind of skills they have, it's always killer having your two wingmen that you choose from your kind of motley crew to back you up. And figuring out what kind of playstyle you want and how you combine those abilities was so goddamn fun. It was just so visceral and so intense, and all the different kinds of powers were all just so satisfying. But the character design and the races were absolutely fascinating, and the games were not afraid to get a little erotic. I'll never forget playing the first game back in like '07 when it came out, and suddenly I was getting it on with this really hot blue alien. I was like, whoa! I was like, I didn't even know this was in here, and suddenly it was like this softcore porn sequence, and I was just like, this is just screaming my name. This is right up my alley. And I'll never forget when the second game came out. It was so cool how you could incorporate all the decisions you had made from the first game into your character in the second game, making it feel like one long story as your character was basically being like rebuilt from scratch and resurrected. It also gave you a chance to work for Martin Sheen for a game, which was a lot of fun. But goddamn, when it comes to a uniquely stylized world with its own mood, its own look, there's nothing quite like the Mass Effect world. It's just an awe-inspiring, jaw-dropping achievement in the world of science fiction. And the fact that we have not had a kick-ass movie or show already for Mass Effect, you just want to shake people and ask them, like, what's wrong with you? Like, a masterpiece is just waiting to be made from this intellectual property. And for my next choice, let's stay in the world of science fiction, and we're going to be diving into one of my childhood faves. And there's probably an animated show that was made at some point over the last 40 years that I'm not aware of that employed this character, but let's talk about Metroid. On the original NES, we had a couple of genuine all-time great franchises emerge. But at age 11, when I played this was probably the first time where I really started to recognize, like, oh, this game is totally unlike any other game that I've ever played before. Like, the gameplay was very specific. It had a kick-ass central character that moved in a really specific way, and the way they would spin as they jumped through the air. And the look of the place, I wasn't consciously aware of things like style at that time, but goddamn, it's a stylish fucking game. The music is just bone-chilling. I love the music to this day. I can just listen to the Metroid soundtrack, and I remember as a little kid, I wasn't good enough initially to beat the Mother Brain at the end, but a friend of mine was, and the first time I saw him beat the Mother Brain, it was his first time he'd killed it. We just stood there and just kept high-fiving over and over and over again till our hands were totally like red and swollen. They were just in agony. And then suddenly during the closing credits, we saw Samus Aran reveal herself to be a chick. And we were like, whoa, oh my God, like this whole time we've been a hot chick and didn't even know it. Anyway, our minds were blown, but there was no internet back then. It was 1987, so there was no spoiler. There was no way to look up how do you kill the Mother Brain. There was no way to look up what happens at the end. You had to discover it on your own. But I feel like if Castlevania can be made into a kick-ass show, so can Metroid, absolutely. And those two gaming franchises are so beloved that they've spawned their own subgenre of games called Metroidvania. You might be thinking, like, what the hell is Metroidvania? One's sci-fi and one's like gothic horror mixed with action. But it's that side-scroller RPG action-driven experience where, in terms of the gameplay and the level-ups and the various skills that you develop, they offer a very similar experience, but also a lot of secrets in the worlds. But that subgenre continues to evolve in leaps and bounds. So I'm sure in that subgenre, there are probably dozens, if not hundreds, of great games that could all be their own shows and movies. People just have to go digging through all the recent classics in that subgenre. And of course, after a cool show or movie's been made from Metroid, you can dive right into Super Metroid, maybe my favorite game that I played on the Super Nintendo. I mean, the first one's so iconic in terms of the mood, but in terms of gameplay, oh my God, Super Metroid. I mean, I will still catch myself late night sometimes watching Super Metroid speedrun contests where you have four people running against each other, and it's just so insane and so intense. Like the level, I mean, they in a matter of minutes they do what took me weeks, but Super Metroid was pretty goddamn good. But let's switch gears to another genre. Right, number 9. We're almost out of games, but we haven't talked about one of my favorite genres in cinema, the Western. And you already know where I'm going with this, but Red Dead Redemption 1 and 2, they're screaming to be adapted. And I have to admit, I played Red Dead Redemption until my eyeballs bled, and then I played the DLC Undead Nightmare in the same way. I didn't really play Red Dead Redemption 2 all that much. I played it for like a couple of days, and then I got distracted by something else, and I never went back to it. So I always kind of know in the back of my mind, I've got Red Dead Redemption 2 just waiting to be explored. And what a lot of people forget is that Red Dead Redemption was actually a sequel or a spiritual successor to Red Dead Revolver. So Red Dead Redemption 2 is kind of the third in the franchise. But if you like Westerns, whether you like reading them or reading the history or watching the movies, this is the best chance you will ever have to go into that world. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, why would you make an adaptation of Red Dead Redemption when you can go back and watch the films of John Ford or Howard Hawks or Sam Peckinpah or Sergio Leone or Sergio Corbucci or Anthony Mann or Bud Bedick or any of the amazing directors who gave us so many incredible Westerns basically from like the late 30s up through the early 70s. And point well taken, some of my all-time, or many of my all-time favorite movies are Westerns, but Red Dead Redemption, it's its own world. It's kind of the Wild West on steroids. It's not trying to accurately capture the Wild West. It's basically everything you think about the Wild West, but dialed up to 11. If it's a beautiful prairie, it's the most beautiful fucking prairie that you've ever seen. Or if you're in a battle, it's the most epic over-the-top battle you could possibly imagine. And I like how it's a world of extremes where it's extremely peaceful or extremely dangerous or extremely sinful. And what's amazing to me is how the Western as a genre in film and television is kind of struggling as of late. I mean, every once in a while you'll get a show like Deadwood, but Deadwood was like 15 years ago. Deadwood was incredible. Or The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, same thing. It was a long time ago. It's a genre that is pretty much dead in film and television, but people clearly still like cowboys and outlaws and that sort of thing because these games were monster hits. I mean, famously, the director of the latest James Bond film, in between takes, he'd be back in his trailer playing Red Dead Redemption 2. So this is the most obvious thing in the world. Bring the Western back and make this world. Just call it Red Dead Redemption. It will allow the Western genre to live and breathe again in either the world or film and television. So who knows? Maybe somebody will pull it off. HBO should fucking do this. And for my last recommendation, I'm going to kind of cheat because there were actually movies first before this game, but this game, this story, has never been adapted into film or television, and I'm talking about Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, which is one of the best games of the early aughts. I think it was Game of the Year in 2003. I played it on my Mac until my eyeballs bled. And it came along at the perfect time where I thought I was done with Star Wars. Like a lot of people who grew up with the original trilogy, I was not into the prequel trilogy. I thought it was ridiculous. So at this time, I was like, fuck Star Wars, moving on. And then suddenly this game dragged me back in. And it just had so many things going for it. The tone and the mood was very like mature and very dark. And it just made the days of the Old Republic seem so larger than life and just epic high adventure at its best, but it managed to incorporate all the best parts of Star Wars while leaving out the worst. And that's always an important thing. Like, how do you get rid of all the stupid kiddie shit, but keep all the really cool shit? And this game pulled it off. And what was interesting for fans of role-playing games, because they used the OGL 1.0A, a subject that's been hotly debated as of late. Basically, I'm not going to go into that here, but it meant that a lot of player building mechanics from Dungeons and Dragons were at play in this game. And so you would start out with one class, like a scout or a bounty hunter or a soldier. And around level 8 or so, you became dual class, stopped leveling up in that first class and started leveling up in a Jedi class. And there were 3 different types of Jedi that you could choose from, Guardian, Sentinel, and Consular, I think is how you pronounce it. But what it meant was that you could play the game multiple times. Like, all right, this time I'm going to start as a soldier, and then I'm going to become a sentinel, or whatever the case might be. And then you could play it through as an evil Jedi. You could go to the dark side and pick totally different story options, allowing you to go to different worlds and have different experiences than you would have if you're playing through as, somebody lit from within with the light side of the Force. So the replayability of it was absolutely incredible, and it was a BioWare game. And when you go back and look at it now, like, oh, this is their warm-up. This is their first pass before diving into Mass Effect, because so many of the, Like so many of the mechanics for how you move around the universe and how you build your teams. Like Mass Effect is basically Knights of the Old Republic just dressed up or evolved for the next generation. But it was so fucking fun. And people's memories of this game are very positive, and I know they keep talking about bringing it back for the PlayStation 5. They announced the return of it a couple years ago, but the news has been kind of dodgy since then. Who knows if that game or if that remake is ever actually going to happen or not. But at a time where Star Wars, under the control of Disney, I would say their batting average for their shows and movies, I mean, it's not the best. For every show or movie that people might talk themselves into liking, there's 2 or 3 other examples where it's just fucking atrocious. And I feel like doing a great show for Knights of the Old Republic would be one of the best ways to kind of put Star Wars back on firm footing, where it's not for 5-year-olds. It's just dark and it's badass and it's about Jedi and Sith going to war, and it would be cool as shit. So those are my 10 recommendations, but I want to close with a philosophical question. Do gamers even want to see shows and movies adapted from their favorite games? Like when I think about some of my, I have a lot of younger brothers who are like a quarter century younger than I am, and they're not super into film and television, at least not in the same way that I am, but a couple of them really like their games. And the question is, can you make a movie or a show that's more entertaining than playing the game for a few hours? And I feel like a lot of filmmakers overlook that at times. Is you're not just trying to compete with other shows and movies, you're trying to compete with the game itself. And if it's more fun to play the game for a couple hours than it is to watch your movie adaptation, you have completely failed. The same holds true with martial arts movies. I love watching mixed martial arts, but I don't watch a lot of martial arts movies because so few of them are more entertaining than just watching a great UFC fight card. Like if you're going to watch a UFC fight card, you know that for 3 or 4 hours, you're going to see some of the best action that you've ever seen in your life. If a movie's not better than a UFC fight card, then what are we even talking about? I'll just keep watching mixed martial arts. So it's going to be very challenging for video game adaptations to surpass or compete with these great games of the past. But I feel like HBO has proven with The Last of Us that it can be done. And there's so many examples from the past where I feel like they need to try again, like Resident Evil 4. I know at this point people are probably sick to death of even thinking about Resident Evil movies or shows because there have been a lot of bad ones. But Resident Evil 4, they keep remaking that game and remastering it and polishing it off and dusting it off because that game was fucking incredible. I mean, it was so goddamn fun. That was another one that just took over my life for more time than I care to admit. But I feel like it would be great if they just released it as a movie, Resident Evil 4, without any movies coming before. People are like, wait a second, but where are 1, 2, and 3? Don't worry about it. It's just Resident Evil 4. But sadly, that might be an example where fans have been burned so many times where they won't trust any film or TV adaptations ever again. But for all the great classic games out there that I overlooked, or all the games, like all the great RPGs that I played in the past that did not make the cut, I do apologize. I mean, just like on the Super Nintendo alone, there's so many great little obscure gems like ActRaiser, which I absolutely loved. I mean, I could probably do a top 100 list of games that could be adapted into film and television, but I like doing top 10 lists, so I like having to make hard choices. But I hope I gave y'all some good fuel for thought. And obviously, if you've played some great gaming franchises in the past that I did not mention, let me know, because I know that for every great game that I play, I'm ignoring 10 others because the time you invest is so considerable. But before I sign off, I do have to share some breaking news from Manscaped, the official sponsor of my podcast, Wrong Reel, because they now sell beard products. That's right. They are once again revolutionizing men's grooming with the brand new Beard Hedger Pro Kit. From a beard trim to a fresh shave, the technology behind the Beard Hedger Pro Kit allows you to shape your signature beard look. Now you can finally use Manscaped products to make your drapes match your carpet by going to manscaped.com and using the discount code WRONGREEL in all caps for 20% off and free shipping. So join the 7 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped and check out the Performance Package 4.0, which includes the Signature Lawnmower 4.0. The advanced skin-safe technology reduces cuts and nicks on your delicate parts. Your John Thomas. It also comes equipped with the 4000K LED spotlight that will shine a light to the promised land below your waist. And a grooming routine isn't complete without applying Crop Preserver and Crop Reviver before you show off your brand new buck-ass naked self to whoever your significant other might be. These unique formulations take care of the smelliest part of your body and are a big boost to your confidence. And to complete the set, Manscaped also includes a shed travel bag and anti-chafing boxer briefs, which are comfortable as hell. I strongly recommend them as free gifts to keep all your goodies stored comfortably. So if you like this channel or you like my podcast, consider supporting my endeavors by making a purchase over at Manscaped, and I'll include a link down in the description below. But give me a shout on Twitter at Geeking Out if you want to talk more about great games that could be adapted into shows and movies. And remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell. But thanks for listening to my rant, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.